Can Ole Miss keep Lane Kiffin around? His name popped up as a target for Florida State if Mike Norvell had been the selection for Alabama. So we talk about that, of course, with Steven Willis, host of Locked On Ole Miss, joining me here on today's show. Is Lane Kiffin a forever guy in Oxford?
Probably not. I mean, I don't know if a forever guy actually exists anymore. In case you're somebody like Nick Saban, that goes on. I think eventually Lane Kiffin's going to go do something else because that's the nature of things. Now, that being said, I know what article you're talking about. It was on that Nick Saban story about him leaving and that Florida State was going to turn their attention to Lane Kiffin if Mike Norvell took the Alabama job. And it's like, that's a completely one-sided thing and not newsworthy at all. It's kind of like, hey, if my wife leaves me, my first choice is going to be Sydney Sweeney. It's absolutely nuts. There's something one side of that conversation that is real, but I guess, I mean, it's the clickbaitiest of quick clickbaitiest stuff right there because Lane Kiffin gets clicks. That's what it is. But I do think he will eventually leave Oxford. He's not a forever coach, but that quote from Florida State is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
I think it's smart from Florida State to say, hey, that's where our attention would be. That's the sort of caliber of coach that we'd be searching for. I think Florida State in the ACC, as the Power Two, the Big Ten, and the SEC are trying to really distinguish themselves and pull away from the other two leagues. I think that can make Ole Miss a more attractive place to be than Tallahassee, but we've seen the Florida State program get to a level where Ole Miss has not. Now, I think Ole Miss, as we're going to get to a little bit later in the segment as well, is very good in 2024. It can get to a level maybe we haven't seen them arrive at yet. But on the surface, Steven, that's kind of the pitch, right? Is for Lane Kiffin to stay at Ole Miss, he would have to be completely void of offers of jobs where you'd say, well, this place is probably a better job. And Florida State on the surface, I think, can be better, especially if they leave the ACC.
Well, that's the rub because you're going to have to pay a certain amount of money to get out of the ACC, which means they may not be at the level financially as successful as even some place like Ole Miss. Now, if you look at the Venn diagram of how good of a program and the programs that are better jobs than Ole Miss, even for Lane Kiffin, there's probably 5 or 6 programs in the whole country at this point. And the rest of them, the next level is Ole Miss is kind of even with them. Now, the other thing that people don't even talk about whenever they think they're very money obsessed is Ole Miss lets him do whatever he wants to do. Do you think Lane Kiffin at Alabama or at Texas would be able to go in the middle of March deep sea fishing? No, he wouldn't. But at Ole Miss, he has that power to do that. So I do think that quality of life and what he's building mixed with the fact that he's making nearly $9 million a year means that he's going to be there as long as he wants to be there. Eventually, I think he's going to go, but I don't think it's anytime soon.
Do you think he would leave for a better college job in his view, or do you think he is trying to get back to the NFL?
I think that honestly, Lane Kiffin is going to milk this college thing for as much as he can, but his next job will probably be the NFL because the college requirements around coaching right now are just so crazy.
Well, it certainly was for Saban and for Harbaugh and Jeff Hafley, and Chip Kelly wasn't a fan of it, so he wouldn't be the first guy to make that sort of move. I think the question is, would an NFL team want to hire? Maybe as an offensive coordinator, but again, we just saw a coach go from a Power 5 coaching position to a coordinator spot. Would Lane Kiffin do that? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that in college, we'll wrap this point on this matter, there are only a couple of jobs that if I'm Lane Kiffin, I'm looking at and saying, yeah, that unquestionably puts me in a better situation than what I've got at Ole Miss. Because the Rebels have got the second highest win total in the SEC. I think they're probably a playoff team in 2024. With the 12-team playoff, that's certainly where they should expect to be. But if the job is not Alabama or Georgia, maybe Florida. I mean, they haven't had the great success that they once did with Urban Meyer and such, but Florida maybe is a job that I've heard that he was interested in that Florida job when it came open. They gave it to Billy Napier anyway. Those are really the only spots. I don't see him going to the Big Ten or to another power league.
Well, I do not think Florida is an option. people are going to assume Florida's an option. I do not think Florida's an option, and that's not a Lane Kiffin thing. That's a Florida thing towards Lane Kiffin. I think Miami is the real threat that if you're looking for an outside-the-box school. I think Miami, if they move on from Mario Cristobal, they decide to drop some coin with them being in South Florida because he vacations down there all the time. I think that is the job that outside of the SEC power jobs that you would probably look at.
I think that they also, like Florida State, would have to leave the ACC for that to happen because there's just so much instability there. But as I talked about on yesterday's show, that's very much a possibility. Let's turn the page to spring football, Steven, and what Lane Kiffin is working on with his team. They had a great transfer portal this offseason. They've got a bunch of key returners. I am very high on the Rebels. I think they're probably going to be a 10-win team. Their win total on FanDuel is at 9.5. What do they need to work on first going into spring football, which just got underway?
Chemistry, with all those transfers gelling together. In 2022, Ole Miss started out 7-0. They were a little bit front runners because in this new mercenary era of football, that can happen a little bit, and they had some stuff go south on them. They fell back. Last year, Jackson Dart was able to kind of be the lead from the front type of guy, the ultimate competitor type guy, and was able to lead them to 11 wins. Need to make sure that Walter Nolan, Princely Emmanuel, and Chris Paul, those guys fit into what they need to do. They have most of the talent back off an 11-win team. These are just pieces that should theoretically make them a little bit better football team. So we'll see. If they buy in, Ole Miss is going to be really good.
What about Jackson Dart? He had a great season last year, early Heisman contender at this point in the very messed up college football calendar. As we go into spring football, I don't expect that to change once the season gets underway. You know, Lane Kiffin teams are going to score a lot of points. It's going to depend on how well he can play at quarterback. I thought they were a great match last year. I love that they're both back for Ole Miss. It's one of the reasons that I like the Rebels. You got a coach and a quarterback returning. There are not as many teams in college football as you would maybe think that can say that, especially a high-level tandem like these two. But how can Jackson Dart be a better version of himself to help this Ole Miss team?
Right now, he is limited. In January, after the Peach Bowl, he had a procedure done. And basically, I don't know if his knee scoped. Something happened on the lower body. He needs to gel with the Juice Wells. He needs to make sure he's in line with Trey Harris. He needs to help the young quarterbacks learn this offense. But moving forward, he basically needs to be a lead from the front person throughout spring practice. He needs to make sure the culture goes as it goes. The best Ole Miss teams over the last couple of years were Matt Corral, whenever he was undisputedly the leader of the team. Jackson Dart last year was undisputedly the leader of this team. This needs to be a situation where Jackson Dart makes his presence known, not necessarily in a bad way or anything like that. But if he does that, leads from the front, and gets them willed to go, because last year, Ole Miss might lose 2 games if it just wasn't for Jackson Dart's competitiveness. And his competitiveness against Georgia Tech and against Arkansas, of all teams, was able to come through at the end and make that not necessarily a game, but it was a situation where Ole Miss could win the game. He needs to instill, it's like, hey, I'm the leader of this team. This is my team. This is my thing. He's coined the phrase, not coined the phrase, but he uses the phrase last dance, because it's his last ride through Ole Miss. And because of that, all of the people are latching on to it as well. So it's going to help make him a focal point on the roster, which as a quarterback, he already is anyway. But it is nice to see him taking that leadership level to the next level. And if he can, I don't know, if he can make it to where those guys like, hey, I need to do what I'm supposed to do. I know this looks bad, but Jackson Dart's looking at me. I think that's the culture that he is trying to instill on the football team. And I think that's the most important step that he has to make in year 3.
Steven Willis, Locked On Ole Miss. Catch him on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as well. Steven, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks, bud.
Kalen DeBoer is taking over for this guy named Nick Saban. And Saban had some comments recently. Yeah, we're going to discuss those.